Tudors, a series that made so many of us fall in love with English history and the captivating era of the Tudor dynasty. But today, in this video, let's take a closer look and ask, how accurate was it really? How much of what we saw on screen actually reflects historical truth? And how much was pure fiction? So, here we are, the final wife of Henry VIII, Catherine Parr. And if I'm being honest, by this point in the Tudors, my interest had started to fade a little. The fiery passion was gone, Henry had aged, and the plot seemed to spiral into endless debates about war and religion. But here's the twist. Catherine Parr might just be the most underestimated queen of them all. Both in the series and in real life, she's often reduced to a quiet nurse or background figure. Today, we're going to change that. And if you're ready to uncover the truth, don't forget to like this video. It really helps the channel and tells me you want more deep dives like this. As I mentioned in the first part, Catherine was portrayed by an actress much older than the real Catherine was at the time. In reality, she was 31 when she married Henry. In the series, Henry says she's still good looking. Well, of course she was. She was only 4 years older than his daughter Mary. Mary was born in 1516 and Catherine Parr in 1512. She was basically the same age as Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour. So yes, she could very well have still looked youthful. And here's a fun fact. Catherine Parr was actually named after Catherine of Aragon. Her mother served as a lady-in-waiting to the first queen. Checkmate, Henry. You were the only one pushing 52 in this marriage. In the series, we see passionate kisses between Catherine and Thomas Seymour, while her sick husband, Lord Latimer, lies asleep in the next room. But this is once again a bit of dramatic license. Thomas Seymour was clearly Catherine's true love, and would become her fourth husband after Henry's death, earning her the nickname of the most married English queen. It's likely that Catherine did meet Thomas in early 1543, just months before her husband's death. However, given her deeply religious nature, it seems unlikely she would have been sneaking around with another man while her husband was ill in the next room. The show also implies that Lord Latimer rejected her bitterly on his deathbed. In reality, there's no sign of that. His will paints a different picture. He left her 2 estates and funds to care for his daughter for the next 4 years. Hardly the parting gesture of a resentful man. In the series, Catherine and Henry's wedding is shown as a grand church ceremony, but in reality, it was a modest and nearly private affair, held in the Queen's closet at Hampton Court Palace. That very room still exists today, and there's even an inscription on the wall confirming the event. Catherine never truly wanted to marry the king. She later said her main motivation for accepting Henry's proposal was that it was God's will. It's likely she saw the marriage as an opportunity to support and influence the Protestant Reformation in England. In other words, she was willing to give up her personal happiness, even her relationship with Thomas Seymour, for the greater good of her faith and mission. That said, let's be honest, she probably didn't have much of a choice. Turning down the king wasn't exactly an option. Catherine chose the personal motto, to be useful in all that I do. It perfectly captured her sense of duty and purpose. As for Henry, by that point aging and in declining health, he still seemed quite fond of getting married. After his disastrous experience with Catherine Howard, he pushed through a law that made it treason for a woman to hide her sexual history from the king. The law, however, included an exception for widows, which is precisely what Catherine Parr was. Another historical inaccuracy in the series appears when Mary tells Elizabeth, before Henry marries Catherine Parr, that they have been restored to the line of succession. In reality, that didn't happen until 1544, and it was very much Catherine Parr's doing. Catherine Parr played a key role in making this happen, using her influence over Henry and encouraging his reconciliation with his children. She was one of the few people able to build genuine relationships with all 3 of them, even with Mary, a devout Catholic whose religious views were very different from her stepmother's. In fact, Mary and Catherine became close friends, and remained so even after the scandal surrounding Catherine's secret marriage to Thomas Seymour after Henry's death. When Catherine gave birth to a daughter from that marriage, she named the child Mary Seymour in honour of her beloved stepdaughter. Tragically, Catherine's joy as a mother was short-lived. She died of childbed fever just days after giving birth. Her daughter, Mary Seymour, also disappeared from historical records by the time she was 2 years old, likely dying in early childhood. So, the jealousy and resentment Mary shows toward Catherine Parr in the series, as well as any suggestion that she took part in a plot against her, is purely fictional. Prince Edward called Catherine Parr his mother, and she had a significant influence on his education. By the way, Edward was actually 9 years old when Catherine married Henry. But in the series, we see a much younger child, barely 5. She also played an important role in Elizabeth's upbringing. In fact, historian David Starkey once called Elizabeth Catherine Parr's greatest legacy. Linda Porter writes, "The adult Elizabeth was very much the product of Catherine Parr. Her education, her religious beliefs, her consciousness of personal image owed much to the stepmother who guided and loved her during those formative years. Catherine had brought up a talented and determined girl, open-minded by the standards of her day, who was not afraid to rule. Her long reign, with its flowering of culture and the establishment of a small country on the northwestern fringes of Europe as a world power, is Catherine Parr's abiding achievement." After Henry's death, Elizabeth went to live with Catherine. Until things took a dark turn, Catherine was eventually forced to send her stepdaughter away because of Thomas Seymour's increasingly inappropriate behaviour. Catherine missed her dearly, and they continued to write letters to each other. And speaking of Catherine Parr's legacy, have you ever seen the famous checkers ring worn by Elizabeth? It's a locket ring with 2 miniature portraits inside, one of Elizabeth herself and the other of a mysterious woman. Historians have long debated who that second woman is. Many assume it must be Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, but some scholars argue it could actually be Catherine Parr. After all, Elizabeth barely knew her mother. She was just a toddler when Anne was executed. But Catherine played a significant, nurturing role in Elizabeth's life. So perhaps it's not Anne, but Catherine who holds that honoured place next to the Queen, literally close to her heart. Henry's trust and respect for Catherine ran so deep that in 1544 he appointed her regent of England, while he went off to fight in France. That was no small honour. Before Catherine Parr, only Catherine of Aragon had ever been trusted with such responsibility. I'm telling you all of this so you see, Catherine wasn't just a nursemaid to an ageing king. She was a remarkable woman, far ahead of her time. She also became the first woman in England to publish a book under her own name. And not just 1, 3. Catherine's growing influence over Henry, especially her involvement in furthering the Reformation, sparked resentment at court and eventually led to a plot to remove her from power. This particular conspiracy is actually portrayed quite well in the Tudors, so I won't retell the entire story. What I do want to highlight is how cleverly and gracefully Catherine navigated the danger. She didn't panic, she didn't lash out. She used calm, intellect, and persuasion to defuse the threat, something her young predecessor, Catherine Howard, tragically lacked. Catherine Parr knew how to survive the Tudor court's most dangerous games, and how to win them with quiet strength. Interestingly, some historians have even suggested that this entire plot may have been a test set by Henry himself. Despite reaching what one might call his silver-haired years, he still enjoyed the game. The tension, the scheming, the court behaving like spiders in a jar. The final scenes of the Tudors show Henry VIII standing in front of his massive portrait, painted by Hans Holbein the Younger. But in reality, that scene couldn't have happened. Holbein had already died by the time Henry was nearing the end of his life. The series ends here, but I want to tell you what actually happened in the final days of the king's life. By 1546, Henry's health had been steadily declining. The last time he was seen in public was on January 17, 1547. His condition worsened quickly after that. On January 18th, Catherine Parr arrived from Greenwich to Westminster after hearing about his failing health. But she was not allowed into his chambers, and he never asked for her. Neither Mary nor Elizabeth were present at court during their father's final illness. On January 27th, Henry reportedly said his last words when he asked to see Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. "I want to sleep first." But by the time Cranmer arrived, Henry was no longer able to speak. Cranmer later said that the king squeezed his hand as a sign of repentance. Around 2 a.m. on January 28, 1547, Henry VIII died, likely from kidney and liver failure worsened by his obesity. He had spent much of his life indulging in rich, fatty foods and avoiding vegetables. At 55 years old, he had outlived the average life expectancy of the time. Remarkably, his death was kept secret for 3 more days. Meals were still brought into his chamber as if he were alive. 15 days later, a grand funeral was held in London. His widow, Catherine Parr, did not attend in person, but watched it from a high gallery in seclusion. Just 4 months later, she would secretly marry Thomas Seymour. Wrapping up our look at Catherine Parr and how she was portrayed in the Tudors, I have to say, I think the series did a decent job with her character, despite the limited screen time she received. And if we look beyond the fiction and focus on the real Catherine Parr, I'd describe her as an attractive and intelligent woman who combined the wit and sharpness of Anne Boleyn with the prudence and diplomacy of Catherine of Aragon. Of course, if we started diving into every storyline in the Tudors, we'd find plenty more historical inaccuracies and dramatised fiction. But for this video series, I really wanted to focus on Henry's 6 wives. They remain the emotional and symbolic core of his reign, and their stories are endlessly fascinating. And honestly, if we treat the Tudors as what it really is, a historical fan fiction rather than a documentary, it's actually quite enjoyable. For many people, this show was their first introduction to Tudor history. It's engaging, visually stunning, and undeniably entertaining. The rest is up to us, the viewers. It's our job to question, to explore, and to seek out the real stories behind the drama. History doesn't end when the credits roll. It begins when we start reading. I'm not saying goodbye just yet. You still have a video coming on the other Boleyn girl, so I'll see you there.